Good morning, everyone. Today we are finishing up our discussion. We're going to be looking at the four categories of labor that exist We're also going to be looking at women's roles in the workforce and part-time workers. Today, the discussion should not take very long. Therefore, you will have the remaining of the time to work on your project for Chapter 8, Labor, which is to research what you want to do after you get out of high school, whether it be a military career, whether it be another career, whatever it is you want to do after you get out of high school. That is what you are to be researching when we finish. Now, this week your assignments are due on Thursday, not on Friday. Remember, because Thursday is technically the end of the 9 weeks. So you have until Thursday afternoon. Friday, when I come to work, I will grade everything and everything will be closed down. I will no longer accept assignments except for the project after Friday the 9th. Okay, that is it. October the 9th. That is it. Your project is not due until the first of the second 9 weeks. So today begins our discussion with the four categories of labor. Well, you're thinking, why in the world, Ms. Harris, did we talk about labor unions first before we talked about the categories of labor? And I do that because this is actually going to be what is more important for you. Some of you maybe never join a union, and that is okay. But you will fall into one of these four categories of labor. My ladies, you need to know how we have been affected by the workforce, and then my part-time workers, which would be all of you, what role do you play in the workforce? So I end with what is most important. So, as we begin our discussion of labor, I want you to think of the different types of jobs that exist in the United States. Okay, we've got cashiers, we got farm workers, we've got farmers, we have doctors, lawyers, teachers, electricians, mechanics. The list goes on and on and on, guys. And each job falls into one of these four categories. And the categories depend on the pay. So we're going to start with our very basic job, which, as you can see, is our unskilled labor. Unskilled labor means you have no skill whatsoever. You are up a creek. This is going to be the lowest of the low wages. Okay, the absolute lowest of the low wages. You do not have any skills that is going to be beneficial to anybody. Therefore, your pay is not going to be very high. So, you are going to have to decide what you want to do in the workforce. And not only that, but what you do in the workforce determines your pay. So we're going to start with, like I said, we're working on our very basic job here, which is our unskilled labor. Now, guys, with this unskilled labor, our unskilled labor, these are going to be like our fruit pickers. Very basic, requires no formal training at all. You're not going to make very much money being a fruit picker, okay? I'm not talking about farmers, y'all. I am not talking about a farmer. Because fruit pickers or pickers in a job, as their profession, their job, it's not going to be a very high-skilled job. You don't have to have any training. You just go to the field, pick the fruit. Go to the field, pick the produce. No specific skill there. All right? Semi-skilled. These are going to require a minimal amount of training. A minimal amount of training. So these are going to be your fast food workers. All right? You have to be trained in order to for them to determine what type of, you have to be trained rather on how to do the job. What the food temps are, maybe it is a busboy. All right, you're thinking, okay, they don't require much training for that, right? Well, no, they don't require much training for busboy, but you still have to have at least some training on which chemicals to use, which ones are going to be important, which ones you cannot mix. So it does require a little bit of training, not a whole lot, but they would still fall into the category of semi-skilled worker. So this is going to be your minimum amount of training kind of jobs. All right. Then our semi-skilled. Okay, guys, these are going to be our mechanics, electricians, plumbers, where you require both experience and training in order to acquire the job. So if you think of this like a spectrum, this is the very lowest of the low, and we're working up to the highest pay. So now, don't get me wrong. Y'all do not get me wrong. I'm not saying that skilled workers don't make a lot of money, because if you're a plumber, you can make a lot of money. If you're an electrician, you can make a lot of money. A mechanic, you can make a lot of money. All right? So don't think that just because it is a skilled worker doesn't mean you cannot make a good living, because trust me, you can. Some of those jobs make more than I do, and I have a formal degree. Okay? So it's not that you cannot make a lot of money in these particular jobs, because you can. All right? And then, guys, our professional degrees. These are going to be the ones you have to have a degree of some sort, whether it be associates, whether it be an associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's, PhD, or some sort of doctoral degree. These are going to be your jobs that have a formal degree. Nurse, teacher, doctor, lawyer, office worker. My husband has a formal degree for his job. He is an inspector, hazardous waste inspector for the state of Alabama. So these require a degree of some sort. Now, women in the workforce, why is this even important? And some of you men say it ain't. I beg to differ, because I'm a woman in the workforce. But guys, why is it? It says this whole slide talks about women in the workforce, and take a second and read it. Lower pay for women. Why is it that women get paid less than men? Why? When did women enter the workforce? Think back to our wars. This is an iconic woman. This is Rosie the Riveter. Rosie is one of my favorite posters from World War II. Why is that? Because she is the ideal woman in the workforce in World War II. When the men went off to war, what did women do? They stepped up. They took the men's spots, showing that women could do the same jobs as men. And not only that, sometimes they could do it better, because women have an attention to detail that some men don't have. Okay, so women did not enter the workforce until World War II. Guys, that was 80 years ago. Less than 80 years have women truly been in the workforce in the United States. Now, does that go to say that women did not work? Oh, no. Please do not get me wrong. Women worked. They were typically stay-at-home moms, but they worked. Not only that, guys, but who were the educators? Women. For as long as there has been a United States, women have been the teachers. That is why, if you look typically at schools, there are more women teachers than there are men teachers, because it has been looked at as what? Women's work. And I wish you could see my air quote there, because that is what it was always looked at. Education was looked at as women's work. We were the motherly type, right? We were the ones that were motherly, and we could teach the young minds of the future to better our futures, right? Well, okay. I had some fantastic male teachers when I grew up. So no, now education is not just looked at as women's work. So please do not get me wrong there. But in the past, that has been typically the role of women throughout history. And that short time span that we have been around in the workforce, just 80 years out of the United States, been in existence since 1776, and even been on this continent far longer. So if you take into consideration the sheer amount of time, guys, far, far shorter have women been in the workforce than men. Now, there have been some initiatives in the United States to try to close the gap between women and men in the workforce, and that's the Equal Pay Act and the Civil Rights Act. Okay, so no longer can employees discriminate based on gender or race. Okay, that's where the Civil Rights Act, Equal Pay Act, if you do the same job, you get the same pay. And we know the Civil Rights Act was for to protest against and for the betterment and equalization of African Americans in the workforce and in the United States in general. Okay, so slowly women are, and I do say slowly, all right, slowly women are closing the gap on discrimination between men and women in the workforce. Some jobs still look at their job as men's work. A mechanic is a fantastic example. Okay, of jobs, electrician, mechanic, plumber, carpenter. Those are still looked at as men's work, and so typically women would make less and have less opportunity in those jobs than they would have in uh, other jobs in the United States. Now, part-time workers, where do part-time workers come in here? Hey, part-time workers. Well, y'all, believe it or not, the United States is ran by part-time workers. And that sounds crazy to say, but it's absolutely true. If you work fast food, how many full-time employees do they have? Maybe 5 at the most. But everybody else is going to be a part-time worker. Now, is it fair that part-time workers get less benefits? And that's what our little political cartoon looks at here. Okay, is it fair that part-time workers get less benefits? Well, yeah. Okay, it doesn't seem fair, but if you're not working a full-time job, which I know college students, it's hard to do that. I did. I worked a full-time job and went to work. Most of my hours, I was full-time where I would work most of my 8 hours in the afternoon, so I would work from like 2 to 10 or 2 to 11 after I got out of school. But I did work a full 40 hours when I was in college. But it makes it hard to make a living. And guys, think about it. If you've got adults with kids working a part-time job, even 2, 3 part-time jobs, it's going to make it extremely difficult to actually make a living in the United States working on a part-time pay. I was dirt poor. I'm not going to lie. It was me by myself. I was a full-time worker. I worked my 35 plus hours a week, and it was still difficult to make a living. Okay, because I was working in a retail job. I worked at Goodies. I even worked at the one on the boulevard when I moved to Montgomery as a shift manager and or department manager rather, and it was extremely difficult to pay bills on that little bit of income. So if that's the case, why is it that minimum wage hasn't been increased? Minimum wage is $7.25. Okay? $7.25. Why isn't that minimum wage hasn't been increased? And it all falls back on supply and demand. Not supply and demand of goods, as supply and demand of jobs. Let's think about this. Okay, you are a part-time worker and you are seeking employment. If you're a part-time worker seeking employment, how many other part-time workers are seeking employment also? Well, probably a lot, right? So we know that if a lot of workers are part-time workers are looking for jobs, but the supply is very low. Okay, not that many part-time jobs, a whole lot of part-time workers. They're not going to increase minimum wage because then more and more people, even more people, would want that particular job. So it would create even more of a shortage of jobs in the United States, and not just in the United States, worldwide, where minimum wage exists. And many people say you cannot make a living and have economic freedom on minimum wage. That I told you, remember, that is one of our 7 goals of economics. We don't do a very good job in the United States, because if we did, guys, if we did a good job of economic freedom, remember, it's a goal because it is something we strive to accomplish. Some people will accomplish economic freedom, some people will not. Okay, that is why we have our social welfare programs. But it is all about supply and demand, filling the positions they have. Now, guys, and part of the time is there's plenty of jobs there, but people just don't want to work them. They're lazy, they don't want to work. Or they get hired and they end up getting fired because they don't show up for work. Okay, so even just the skill set and the mentality of those that are being hired is going to be a huge problem. That is why they would rather fill the jobs with an older adult that needs a job than a teenager that needs the job. Adults are typically more reliable than teenagers. I'm sorry, it's just the truth. Because typically that adult who has that job more than likely has children that they're trying to support, or they're trying to support themselves, and they, even if their full-time job doesn't cut it, they may be seeking that part-time job outside of the hours of their full-time job. Okay, so typically you're going to see fast food restaurants, places as that want to fill the jobs with adults instead of teens. Now, what's the problem with that? They want to fill the jobs with adults other than teens. But guys, are adults typically going to work a fast food job if all they're working is minimum wage? No. Okay, they just are not gonna. They're not going to work those jobs. Okay, so it becomes a real problem for businesses. They don't want to hire a ton of teenagers because of the lack of responsibility, typically, but they cannot find adult workers who want to fill those jobs. Okay, so it becomes a real problem for businesses, not only businesses, but people who are trying to actually find a job as well. Okay, guys, that does end our discussion of labor in the United States. I wanted you to see where you fit into all of this. Right now, you fit into the part-time worker. You may fit into the semi-skilled worker. And so you need to know how all of these things affect you. And I told you in the beginning that I try to make economics as practical as possible. Because if you don't see how it relates to you, then you are not going to care. You have the remaining of the period to work on your project or any assignments that you have not completed for chapters 8, which is our labor chapter. So take this time, use it wisely, and get your assignments done so I can get them graded and put in by the end of the 9 weeks.